Hello and welcome. I'm George Saltzman, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this series of webinars that are focused on integration of artificial intelligence and other advanced digital innovations in education. We're going to talk about some of those today. This series is co-hosted by the UNESCO Institute for Information Technology and Education and Shanghai Open University, and is made available free for you to integrate into your educational curriculum or courses, should you choose to do so. This week, we are thrilled to welcome Maya Georgieva. Maya serves as the Director of Innovation of the Innovation Center at XR, and Quantum Labs, that's a lot to say, Maya, at the New School. There, I believe you lead a team focused on immersive storytelling, spatial computing, AI, quantum computing, future interfaces design, all the fun stuff. So welcome.
Thank you very much, George. And really, it's exciting to be able to present today, speak about these topics that are so relevant about the future of education.
Well, thank you, Maya. I just want to tell the audience, it's such a pleasure to have you here. One of the 30 higher education influencers to follow in 2022. I assume that still carries on for 23. Has been featured at South by Southwest. You've been working with MIT Media Lab, featured in The Atlantic, The Economist, part of the Fulbright Scholar Program. And now you're here with us and UNESCO IITE, Shanghai Open University webinar series today. So we're so honored to have you. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and turn it over to you, Maya.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Maya Georgieva, and I'm here to speak about the shaping the future of immersive learning in a Metaverse AI world. And I'm so thrilled to be here at the UNESCO Institute for Information Technology and Education and be able to share some of my work with all of you. So a little bit about me. That's me there, and that's actually a hologram of me. I'm now translating in 3D mode on the flat screen, but that was just fortuitous. Just before, actually, we 2 years ago, before we left for the pandemic, we took that hologram, and I've been using it ever since in so many opportunities to share with the global community. So you have a sense of who's talking to you. But my work is really embedded at the New School, and I have the opportunity to serve as the Senior Director at the Innovation Center, which works with all of our colleges across and also our campus in Parsons, Paris. It just gives me an opportunity to create an innovation hub and invite our creators and designers and our thinkers and makers and social scientists and performers together, and that's what we do. And what you see on this other screen is the project that our students have worked over the years with us, and it's only a small sample. And that is really the reason I do this work, because I think that this is really about the next generations of scientists and creators and technologists and designers and performers. And since more recently, in the last couple of years, we expanded our reach, starting as an XR lab, as our XR Reality Center in 2017, and moving to embrace frontier technologies like AI and quantum. And this is now our signature XR AI and quantum labs, where we work in the context of extended reality, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, especially in the natural language processing. And yes, we have successfully run not just X Reality and XR hackathons, but also for the last 3 years, we've been running the Quantum Design Jam, which has become a signature event for our students. At the lab, we work on across the domain of extended reality. We work in creating and building spaces for our students to meet for extracurricular and curricular. We meet spaces for them to exhibit their work. We meet socially in virtual reality spaces, and we create, and we also ask them to think about their future and create themselves as they invite us in their world. So this is, again, some of the things we do. Also excited to share, and I'll be sharing a little bit more about the immersive storytelling course that I lead at the New School with the Parsons School of Design, and each semester, about 100 students join me in that course to think about the future of storytelling. We also work on a course, Mixed Realities, which actually works in the context of more of really sort of the blend between virtual worlds and physical reality, and thinking about the context of what humans see and what computer vision is, AI and just augmentations, the opportunities to think about digital twins and what that means for us in the future. So yeah, so the course that is certainly one of the work I do every semester, and an opportunity, a playground and a testing site to think about the future of what we bring to how we engage with the metaverse, how do we create learning experiences in the metaverse, is certainly the immersive storytelling class, which I lead with the help of 4 TAs over 15 weeks with 100 students, which is running as we speak this spring. So in this course, I invite students to join me in the classroom, where we get to critically examine questions related to the latest trends and developments in the space. But we also meet in the metaverse. We meet embodying avatars, and we got to sit and talk around our virtual campfire and try out a number of different learning experiences to think about, well, what does it mean to meet in an avatar form in virtual space, and what are students able to do. And this is a moment where everybody is also very much invested in creating. And I think that's not just a space for socially to interact, which is so important, but also to think about this sort of next frontier of where science and technology and design goes, where like our workforce will rapidly change to embrace this technology. It will have an impact on how we think on every area, and this is, you know, one shot of a very busy class, a small section of the class invest in trying out things in these spaces. And yes, when I enter these spaces, I embody an avatar. That is my avatar form, Maya in her shape. And it's very interesting to think about and what happens in terms of representation, in terms of identity. Over the past few years, I've also had the opportunity to start with very static avatars. And today, avatars like Ready Player Me and walking into spaces, they actually mirror my facial expressions. I get to use my body language because I'm fully embodied as I teach in these virtual worlds, and my body language is translating. And as I get closer to students, we get to have this much more engaged and somewhat intimate conversation, and others are perhaps in other parts of the virtual world. So it's very different compared to how that translates in a video conferencing solution, like many of us use for more frequent online learning. So really testing what's possible and how this translates when we have the affordances of immersion, of presence, of embodiment, and ultimately agency, that I get the agency to create opportunities for my students in these spaces, and they get the agency to create and also collaborate together. And that is very unique in a way we think about sort of entering these spaces in the future. So again, every year, the ultimate test for the students is to create. And I think that's very important because there's so many affordances that are new, and the way to really understand the complexity and their context, the way to understand what code is and what the impact of code is in these virtual worlds. And the potential is actually to be behind the driving seat and be able to create and test your hypothesis and see, you know, what the impact of these spaces is on other peers and other really on us, all of us as people. And so this is, again, something that happens. But I also want to highlight sort of the full spectrum of the power of immersive learning, and want to bring in some projects from colleagues that I've collaborated and talk. And that's usually, it's so important to have a community in the space of immersive learning and virtual reality for educators and researchers and practitioners alike, as we try to think of new ways of engaging with the space. And so I want to highlight the project from the University of Michigan at the Extended Reality Center there, where I collaborate with some colleagues, and this is a solution for really nursing courses. It's a simulation where students can put on the HoloLens and actually learn how to properly administer chemotherapy. And chemotherapy is also like a space where you don't want to make mistakes, but you also want to make sure that the nurse is confident and they're able to administer, and also the patient are getting the best experience that can possibly do. And so by actually encouraging students to do these simulations and giving them the opportunity to try them and enter the space multiple times, it's really what is really an affordance in these simulations, where we immerse, we get to practice skill set, we get to perhaps sometimes fail, but it's fail safe, right? We can learn for that, and we have the opportunity to also review these reactions and go back again and feel and get better at it. And I think ultimately that is a very powerful way to think about simulations. Another very much unique characteristic for the virtual worlds and virtual simulations is going in places where it's really not safe for human beings to be. And one such place is a nuclear reactor. And at the University of Michigan, they have a full simulation on a nuclear reactor where students can learn beyond everything from the process to actually being on site at the plant, and things like safety, very important in this space, and also being able to, again, enter multiple times. They have a frequency that allows them to learn, to test, to really understand the protocols, and ultimately be prepared to leverage this. So these are simulations that really are true examples of how important and how sort of this affordances does not exist in other settings. We oftentimes looking at things could be grainy pictures or just protocols or manuals, but we know that actually studies are now showing that there is a time upward to 10 times faster retention rate of actually being in a simulation, and paired with the opportunity to debrief. And that's also a very important part of the debriefing, having ultimately the experience, but then having the opportunity to also debrief this with a mentor or a faculty. And this is something that will continue to be important, no matter how good our virtual simulations will happen to be. So another project which I think brings this all together, and it's a particularly important project because it really brings together the impact on the environment. It happens to be situated in a part of the world like the Middle East, where there's still a number of different conflicts between neighboring countries. And this project is set in the Jordanian River, between Jordan, Israel, Palestine, and many of us have witnessed and lived with, unfortunately, a long-standing conflict in this area. But what all these countries share is the Jordanian River. And so every one of the places where they're able to bring youth is a camp, which they have a physical camp. Only once a year, a small cohort of youth from each of the countries are able to basically enter, come on site and really be together, spend time and learn about the environment, their shared resource, and perhaps, as an opportunity to think about how they can come together. Well, what if instead of doing this just once a year, we have the opportunity to bring students here multiple times during the year? And this is what I actually had the opportunity to work with them and really shepherd the beginning of this project and do. And what you see is snapshots from the Jordanian River Virtual Peace Park. And what this is almost like a digital twin of the site, which all of these countries shared. And students are able to walk in the site with really understand the environment, understand the geography, understand the impact, even being able to go in each other's site and see how parts of the river upstream difference from parts of the river downstream based on actually the impact of how we use that resource, how different communities do this resource. So you get to also be in sites that normally they don't get to be as often. And as we know, and unfortunately, this is a region divided by conflicts, long-standing conflict. But now there's another way, there's another opportunity to do that. And they're also able to go in residence and really think about the ecology, think about the river, think about this as a shared resource. And water is a resource that all of these communities need in order to continue to live, to thrive. So this is, I think, a project that really embraces so many, it's so rich, and it's in a way it looks in terms of what a virtual world and a virtual environment can do that. And why not? We can do this. And just do this in real life, but to learn exactly what happens, to learn the science of this impact, is you can actually go and see the sewer system. And as we know, whether it's cities or communities, oftentimes that has a huge impact on how these resources unfortunately are managed, and you know what the impact on the environment is. There's also a water plant there where I was able to visit, and so the participants in future expeditions, they actually can not only visit the water plant, they can play with variables and see the impact. And that's another thing, having the opportunity to have agency to make a decision and see its impact. And this is really like having a completely different timeline, introducing students of what their action now can mean for the future. That is a context not just in this simulation, in others, but it's inherent in something that is, again, an affordance truthfully available to us in virtual worlds. So this is, again, just appreciating the level of detail that ended up doing in what I'm saying is really much more than a replica and very close to a digital twin of this space. So a number of youth, along with their counselors, can come and experience the site and think about this. And what EcoPeace was faced in thinking about this space is something that we all faced, meaning that they have to think about, you know, the culturally appropriateness of this material, how different young youth and younger students will enter in their comfort level with this technology, their comfort in engaging in a conversation. They, in addition to having some of the natural side, they also build spaces to gather and talk and share, like an outdoor theater. And that also has been a place for them to exhibit some, just like we do in science fairs, to exhibit some of their thinking, some of their projects. And now this really extends to, you know, bringing not just the being in this virtual simulation, but having the social impact of the simulation. And I think hopefully someday maybe bringing a whole new generation, which will be much more open-minded and recognizing the importance of this resource, the Jordanian River, to all of them, and perhaps the greater prosperity in the region. So this is one of my really a really interesting project for me, because it really brings this context of science, impact on our environment, shared resources, conflict resolution, thinking about how to navigate these virtual worlds with obviously students that might be from very diverse background, and at the same time making them comfortable in entering. So with that, and you know, with this, what exciting space this is, there's also like what's happening right now. Obviously, OpenAI has dominating headlines and conversations in academic circles and in basically in classrooms, I think, across the world. And this has been a phenomenon. This is just, if we look at OpenAI being released last fall, and the the rapid growth of people trying and of people using it at this point, even on a daily basis, is unprecedented. We, even in reference to social media and some of the platforms that are fairly ubiquitous have become around the world, OpenAI had at this point actually moved beyond that. And so this, I think it's important to really think about then how, what is that opportunity for virtual worlds? How would that have an impact? And so in the next few slides, I want to talk a little bit about that. So we know that this is a model that is a natural language model. I think what makes it so approachable is that you can ask in your own voice. You can ask a question, you can ask for help, and ask a very much a personal question to a recipe, to a question about the foundations of a science or research or even a phenomena. And at this point, ChatGPT is built on a model that takes in everything that existed on the web since about 2021. But we know that this model is growing. We also know that at some point it will be live on the internet. And we also know that the ChatGPT-4 is coming, which will be even more powerful. But yes, this is certainly just the rapid growth of this is been incredibly to watch. So before I go into discussing some of the other things, I want to also call another project, because I think ultimately it's, again, like everything, things get better when there's a convergence of things. And it's, while ChatGPT is text, it receives questions in text and is able to respond in chat. DALL-E is another OpenAI system that can create realistic images. From a description, really from description in a natural language. So whether you want to see an urban space, or you want to see a rendering of alien world, or something in between, as long as you can describe it and provide it a prompt, basically you will receive a sampling, and then you can further elaborate and further improve. And the same thing with ChatGPT. One of the things I think when you take it further is not just asking it a single question, but asking it follow-up questions and thinking of how that could be useful. Now, I say that it is a powerful model that we've not had before. People are now moving on to not using a browser, but having ChatGPT open in their text and working with it. At the same time, there are limitations. There are most notably a number of limitations, that the model only takes until a certain date, but also the model is limited in terms of being able to dive deeper in a field. My field happens to be immersive and emerging technology, so it's very good to giving me foundational principles. But as soon as I ask for really topics, projects that I've pretty much tracked the globe to see in educational institutions, research lab, it's not able to pinpoint to that. It has a very, very short library of projects that it is usually quoting. So just a few things to keep in mind as we go forward. That said, it's very powerful. Another model that, in addition to both the OpenAI, the ChatGPT, and DALL-E, is Midjourney. And Midjourney is an independent research lab, which is exploring this medium, and particularly the power of images. And Midjourney is able to sample images and really, again, in a prompt, produce images that further can be edited and further can be narrowed down to a particular topic. So, and Midjourney and most of those that exist, it's not just the site, it's also the community that is, like the community on Discord, where people collaborate, where things are shared. And not just that, but people getting to think about, well, what is the best way to actually create a prompt for these OpenAI chat systems. And in context, I'm also finding this with my colleagues and students, thinking about, well, some of us are just being better successful in the output, in actually creating a better prompt. And this is a question for all of us to think about what this means. But where this goes ultimately is that today they're not just systems for for text and for images. They're systems that can create 3D content. They're systems where you can speak to, and they create even like small settings, virtual settings that then you can take download and do something. In the past, often in our field, particularly in virtual reality, of creating content, and it still is one of the weaknesses we have. We don't have enough good educational content. Well, now we have these really new ways to create content. Speak to the tool, and the tool is able to really create in a fraction of the time we'll spend a number of different images, 3D objects, and in some cases, entire worlds. So, but it is important to also know that this is also an area that it requires very critically to examine it, because what's happening is that some of these platforms really take on everything that's on the internet. They don't really recognize copyrights at the moment. So they sample work of established artists or established sources, and they're able to mash and reimagine and remash without really any notice of the author of these sources, whether it's art, video, text, all of them. So they're able to draw on that work, but never really quote or give credit to that work. And that is certainly a question, and it's definitely an issue, not just in terms of how we use it in academia and higher education, in any educational setting, how our students is using it, and how that content may end up being appropriately used in a purposeful way or misappropriate. And one comparison is that so much artwork has been sampled from existing artists. Now, if you sample something from Van Gogh from about 2 centuries ago, we recognize the style. But once you start sampling from artists that are just working in the field, and dare I say, younger artists that are about to make it in the field, that has a huge impact on their future careers, on their livelihood. I have also people question, are we going to have internship if we can outsource the students who can create drafts and research, the students who can create graphic design and images, how are they going to enter these fields? So it's very interesting to appreciate what this new opportunity to really create as we, very natural way, meaning describing things in text, which most of us are really comfortable. And then at the same time, think about what is the model to license this? And that's something that really is an emerging conversation. Now, that said, our conversation today is about the metaverse. So I want to kind of bring these two things together, because indeed, bringing XR, the entire spectrum, augmented virtual, mixed reality, and artificial intelligence like OpenAI is incredibly powerful. The convergence itself creates opportunities we've never had before. And I'm going to give an example that is very easy to understand and very relevant, not just in one field, but many fields. And so, for example, all of us, especially younger professionals, as they get on the job, they have to face sometimes difficult interview questions. They may face questions around their soft skills, their communication skills, their management skills, depending on where they enter the field. And so this is why virtual speech is one such simulations, which allows students to interview, and on the other side, the interviews are actually powered by ChatGPT. Now, what happens is that we can create today simulations, and we can create branching narratives in these simulations, meaning that depending on a certain storyline, students can be faced with different in terms of challenge questions, or different in terms of areas of work or expertise questions. But with ChatGPT, this is fundamentally becomes exponential. There's so many topics and areas. It is ultimately tapping also on what the learner or the student is responding in real time. So it's not it's relevant. Now, this ultimately is the kind of simulations we've been wanting to do, that are custom, that are personalized, that allow students to master the skill level at where they are at, and at the same time challenge them to grow, adapt, and learn. So this kind of impact on really developing soft skills, impact on behavior, really confidence, is incredibly relevant. And I think this is one example, but certainly something that goes across, can go across many different types of simulations. So this is one of the first. Now, there has been an interesting context of that some have mentioned that because of the use of ChatGPT, sometimes the conversation may go a little slower. And of course, when things start, they tend to be this way, likely to improve, but it's really, it's important to know that as we're entering these fields. Another area where ChatGPT and that convergence really between the virtual and the kind of OpenAI chat functionality is in actually a great example for that is the cognitive optimization and relational robotics lab at Georgia Tech. And what they do is actually they work with robots and they kind of try to figure out are we good at teaching robots? Can robots teach themselves? Or how can we improve that model? And one perfect setting for that could be, just as you see, in real, trying with the robots in real world. But another way to think about it is in digital twins, where you can test and test these models, have a hypothesis and see how they behave, because ultimately, while you can test them this way, at some point in the future, we want these robots to be on the construction side. We want them to be in hazardous spaces where perhaps they will be moved by by humans being in the digital twin, virtual safe environment when they can operate them. And that's another growing area in simulation, in the opportunity to leverage now artificial intelligence as a way to not just optimize a simulation, but actually be the sort of the computer being the vision of seeing how humans behave, and then being able to use that as a model to teach robots, and then in a sense robots teach themselves, and continue to experiment with that. But that will have an impact on us humans, as I said, because we have our capacities, and there's certainly places on Earth we don't want to be, and maybe places beyond actually where we are today. So another interesting way to think about, again, the conversion of a digital twin, conversational AI, artificial intelligence, and robots, growing areas of research. So yes, as I mentioned, where these things become ultimately really powerful is in that convergence. And so we will, I think, we'll continue to see more in that context. And this is actually sort of some rendering from Midjourney in terms of content for the metaverse. And so at this point, we actually are looking at OpenAI and Unity. And Unity is a platform which is have a very steep learning curve. And if we're able to speak to it directly from something like an OpenAI, that allows a lot of different educators to enter. That doesn't, it does mean that you probably will always have professionals, but certainly developing a simulation is very, very long process. And I think that by having the opportunity to create not just assets, virtual worlds, but the next part is digital characters, right? Just as in the video game, we have characters that may be part of the action. In simulation, sometimes we actually need additional characters to test our collaborative skills or communication skills, or perhaps we need to work in a team. And now imagine being able to actually speak and create those. And this is happening as we speak. So kind of like a summary slide as we think about this, virtual worlds, reference in this case, synthetic reality, OpenAI, and sort of its ways that it can connect. And it's really thinking through the entire experience, the entire virtual twin experience, from creating the asset, the images, the audio, any other relevant media, the 3D assets in terms of just a world building these spaces, the avatars, also like just being able to even think about creating some of the testing scenarios, some of the teaching materials, all of these, and then behaving in a manner that these are true to science phenomena. This, I don't think we've had that. Usually to approach that, it would require a very, very developed and professional development team behind it. So it's really interesting to kind of where it's starting and where it's going in terms of the potential it will bring to us, not in education, in workforce preparedness, and possibly in research. So as this is coming our way, of course, there are lots of ethical questions. It is that it happens. It's not just with these technologies, but also other technologies that law catches with technologies. And so we are kind of caught unprepared. And it's a volatile world out there where a lot's taking place. Unfortunately, the world, we are witnessing conflict, war, witnessing various regional political unrest. And of course, our impact on environment is something that continues to have impact on our livelihoods across the world in global communities. So nothing happens in a vacuum. All this is happening in the world we live in, just as oftentimes education is. So it's very important to think about ethics in the metaverse. And in that context is the context of safety, of privacy, of security, of data. Are we ready? Are we, are we prepared to enter? How our students and colleagues, do they have the necessary digital and at this point really virtual worlds fluency to enter? And I think that these are really important questions, because ultimately whose metaverse that will be, who will build the metaverse, who engage in the metaverse. So privacy and safety, too, very important when it comes to education. When you think about when we are fully embodied in these virtual worlds and we're wearing a headset or even wearing glasses, there's so many more data being captured than just point and click on a website. So we see things, we engage with things, and the headsets are actually tracking our gaze, tracking our facial expression, tracking our movement in these worlds. And so there's some record that mentioned that 20 minutes of VR use can generate approximately 2 million data points and unique recordings of our body language. And that ultimately is far more. And once we have that, then a record that can be collected even for our personal devices like mobile phones and web. And then think about this, a lot of this data, actually from that data can be inferred a lot of different things: our health, our cognition, whether we are engaged, our mental state, and all of these things are very, very personal. And they can also speak to individual risks or even to diseases or the way we respond to things in the future. So this is a very important area. And I think around the world, we're starting to see different political and research bodies getting engaged in thinking about that. And there's this, and then of course that's to happen now with ethics and AI. And even fundamentally on some of the questions that I just raised, but also should we know that this is content created by AI in a virtual world? How do we know? Is it an AI speaking to us or just an avatar? Is it a human being in a headset, or is it artificial intelligence engine that is just responding to us? And these are only scratching the surface. I'm seeing here that we also moving in time. So this is a research that I think fundamentally will continue to engage with. Very little research, I think, in the context of the US. I think the strongest approach to that definitely is in Europe, and much more developed and framed in a number of European statement, like things that are already GPTR, legislation like GPTR and others. So something that has been much more in the white papers in the US, I think GPTR sets some real precedents and the opportunity to think much more engagingly in Europe. And so how do we go about thinking about that? How do we address this? Whether it is providing a safe environment, equitable, inclusive environment. And I'm going to point to a couple of things that that I usually think about when I engage. Well, ultimately, we have to think about this on a system thinking level, that things have a correlation. Things don't exist in a vacuum, that the environment, the culture, the engagement we have with us, the things we want to build and create, they all work together and they all have impact on each other. And so system thinking takes this approach on a much higher level of how things relate and interface and interact with each other. And then we do want this to be an inclusive, these metaverse and inclusive worlds. And I think the starting point is universal design. And I'm saying that it is the starting point because it is, because ultimately there's opportunities to think in a much new ways of how we design this world so that many more participants can enter. In some cases, they already have been bringing people with different abilities in it, and particularly people who with just different abilities around movement, that they can enter these worlds and they can actually be represented as fully able and fully moving bodies. And that I know is a joy. I've seen that in my students. But not many, we're not thinking in an approach that design is suitable for everybody. And there's certainly a number of different abilities that we are yet to address. It's good that there are people, designers in particular, that are people from advocacy group that are very engaged. We have now a working group, we have guidelines that are becoming available. And that is helpful because then we all can benefit from thinking from the very beginning of how do we create these equitable spaces. And of course, this is something that we at Parsons School of Design embrace full-heartedly, of thinking about a human-centered design, that this is these virtual spaces at the end of the day are to serve us to extend our opportunities for engagement and putting the needs of humans first. And rather than just looking at this headset and what a headset can do, it should be started really thinking about, well, who is this encouraging to enter? How is this becoming a space for community? What brings these people back? And what are some of the outcomes? What are some of the decision making that we make that may discourage or generate different reactions or outcomes? And I think the goal is to actually improve that. Now, just recently, from University of Cambridge, created these 10 principles for designing a good metaverse, and why legal frameworks are really, really important, and we need to all as a community work towards them. And particularly, I think embracing them and bringing our perspective from education. We all every day already engage with these worlds, and I think it's important for all of us to also, as we bring colleagues, as we bring students, to find frameworks to initiate these conversations, keep them alive, and keep them very relevant and important for all, on the forefront for everybody. And I think these 10 principles begin to do that it is open, that it is safe, that it is accessible, that it is inclusive, that protects our data, that it's really values privacy and our multiple cultural and other heritage, that innovates responsibly to all of us, and in a way complements our experience in the physical world. So this is an extension of ourselves, and we should be very careful of how we think about it, what we build as this future reality, which will be expand beyond just thinking about in isolation the virtual and the the real world. So another work that is very important for me, as somebody who started in thinking about human rights about 2 decades ago in technology, and particularly in the context of our civic and social engagement, is done by the Electronic Freedom Foundation. And for some time, they've been talking about extending the notion of human rights to virtual worlds, because ultimately virtual worlds are about real people. And I think some of their work really points to that, points to more regulation, more protection, more ethical guidance, and really in the context that we don't do harm. And that's ultimately really, really important, especially because a lot of this technology enters from big tech, and it's oftentimes out in the market before a lot of these critical questions are being considered. And human rights are the foundation of that. And governments and companies and law and legal frameworks usually benefit from having that system that works within that context. So, and I'm wrapping up here, but essentially we want to, this is all about a conversation about the future of learning. And I want to wrap this by providing a couple of examples of what this means, of perhaps borrowing from different communities that actually gives us an insight of what we can do in education, of what a truly authentic virtual experience could be. At the moment, we borrow in from things that we've learned from the past, things that we've learned from the teaching online and teaching in sort of virtual worlds that perhaps not fully embodied, but we still can enter and have an avatar. But now we have completely new opportunities as technology continues to advance. And I want to speak about an experience called the Space Explorers experiences, which is created by Felix and Poe Studios, which is a Canadian company working in the space. Felix and Poe have been innovating in the space for some time. People who have looked in virtual reality context, I'm sure, have seen some of the IIS experiences. And now they have a new experience called the Infinite. And this is a location-based VR experience that allows to really enter the space and freely roam within the space. I'm going to just show a little bit of video. You put on the headset, you're being onboarded, and you get to tour the International Space Station, which is of in itself probably the most complex scientific facility that we have. It's embedded with science, but at that space, it's really for humans. And so the Felix and Poe sent 360 cameras up into the space station. It's a 3-year project with 10 astronauts that they actually followed from the very beginning, from departure to being up on the space station, working there for over 2.5 years, a series of them, and then back to Earth. And now they've created this ultimate experience for anybody to enter. And it is an interesting experience because it blends authentic. It is all the footage that they were able to take 360 from the International Space Station, take us out to step in the shoes of an astronaut. And at the same time, they allow us to connect to the human experience of these astronauts. So as they think about it, this is one really interesting area. And I think these type of simulations that extend between and connect the virtual and the physical, we'll see more. And you see here the architecture blueprint of how this works today. And it's installed in Canada and the United States on the West Coast, currently in San Francisco. And you enter in, you get an onboarding experience. Very important. Sometimes even when we enter in our simulations that we have, is that onboarding experience to be smooth, to really, for participants to know what's happening. And then you get to engage in small groups. And it's very interesting how they did that. People who are in the same team together in the same cohort, the avatars have this kind of warm color glow, so you know where everybody is in the experience. People that are there at the same time from other teams are in cool color shape, so while you're aware of them being there, you also know who is with you, who's your party. You get to experience science phenomena like no other place, like let's just say being in the wormhole and being, on the International Space Station is no small feat for all of us. But then they realized that also, just as we speak, the importance of reflection. So they've created a space and opportunities for the cosmic ballet, where you just get to sit and kind of take a rest and think about the significance of this experience. And then you get to proceed and see sort of the path of the solar system. Again, we have 10 astronauts who contributed to this content, but so many people are now being able to enter and have this opportunity, and possibly some of them the future generation of astronauts. So this is coming very interesting, because we also have something like Space Engine, which is really a space that you can simulate the universe. And while today exists in some capacity in STEAM and other, this is a STEM experience like no other. It actually provides unimaginable amount of data. You can walk on craters of the moon. You can experience the sunrise on an alien planet, but at the same time, you're actually seeing actual data that the simulation is giving you real time. And this is not just the solar system, but some of the exoplanets and others. And this is just an amazing way to think about understanding science phenomena, understanding how we, maybe thinking about physical and chemical phenomena here on Earth. So a really powerful simulation. And as I wrap this talk, it couldn't be more timely, but just this week, NASA has actually launched its challenge, Mars XR2 Challenge. And what NASA has created is encourage all of us in education, in not-for-profit, in various organizations and community to contribute and create the assets needing to train the astronauts to their mission to Mars. And I think that's an opportunity for everybody to participate, but it's also another opportunity to think about the relevance of how important these simulations are becoming in terms of building a virtual reality, the assets, the scenarios, all the extra terrestrial activity, including learning how to ride a rover. And that is now being presented as a challenge to all of us to embrace, or creating perhaps one of the most important simulation as we're definitely looking out into that future. And what you see here, we're seeing a robot and an astronaut and working together. And I think that's the future of science, the future of research, the future of collaboration. So in conclusion, the way I entered this field, and that's really my philosophy, is that ultimately we're moving away from the classroom. We're leaving the classroom, and we have to think of our students as researchers, as scientists, as makers, as strategists and explorers of new worlds, having a real contextual challenge and a problem that they can actually address by bringing all of their skill set together. So the next, this is how I see it. This is how I see the next frontier of learning. It could be a game, it could be a space, it could be a global community where all of us could enter and really participate and bring value to creating and solving problems. So finally, as I conclude this talk, I want to mention that it's very important that we're in a place with just really incredibly powerful tools. There is a lot of responsibility to do that, but also there's a responsibility in thinking about what this presents to all of us. And I think this quote summarizes that we shouldn't think of these worlds as a media experience. We should think of them as human experience, because ultimately we'll enter, we'll learn, we'll make memories, we'll get better, we'll have new confidence, and this will stay with us forever. And I think this is the importance of thinking about what virtual reality, extended reality, and all of these worlds can do for all of these new technology, the convergence of them can do for us in this new context. So I know we probably are a little bit over time, but happy to answer some questions.
Wow. Lots of content, lots of activity that's been happening in the chat while you've been talking. Um, Specifically, one of the things that we've been talking about in the chat, UNESCO has estimated that we need to train 69 million new teachers to be able to meet our goal for 2030. That need is especially imperative in sub-Saharan Africa. One of our participants here from Zimbabwe asked the question about how might we be able to use these technologies in teacher training. What are the kinds of ways that you imagine that we could use this to help teachers be able to help us meet the goals that UNESCO has for training 69 million new teachers? And how might we think about accreditation and assessment of that in a more global context?
Yes, I think bringing teachers together in global communities is ultimately a very important part, and we could do so much more. I think this brings the idea that things are created and people are testing them, and the opportunity to share really still lacking, because some of the formats, like if we create simulation in one place of the world, how does it get transferred to another place of the world? We don't have this global place for educational content, and I hear this all the time. And ultimately, that's an important part of it, right? It's important part that teachers from across the world have access to these technologies. And of course, I don't want to undermine the digital divide that exists, that these run on powerful computers, powerful headsets, it requires bandwidth. But I also want to think about that we all can create innovation hubs where perhaps this can give an opportunity for, in a community kind of settings, to embrace that, as these things usually tend to get cheaper, the more people embrace them. So I want to acknowledge that, because it's an important point. At the same time, I think sharing practice between teachers and content that they can leverage is very, it's a key part. Part of entering this field is creating the right mindset. And I think it takes a moment for us to think about when we're no longer just using a mouse and a keyboard, and think about, like, how does this become a powerful experience? Everything has to happen in the air? No. And I answer this every single day. No, because ultimately, this should be in the right time and in the right place, and that facilitation and collaboration can happen. But it's ultimately as a training. It's a training site. Like, I also see in simulation where teachers can enter and get better in just collaborating with students, or even with younger generation, classroom management skill set. So I think it's advocating, it's finding an opportunity to create a center at your school or your district or your community where teachers can gather, experience, talk about that, hopefully bring other colleagues or even bring their students. And I think that model of whether you are in New York City or some other place in the world is very powerful. I am in the context of New York City, but my lab has brought so many high school students and teachers in experiencing that technology and STEM and girls and technology. And I think we have to be looking at that. More broadly, institutionally, I think there is definitely an opportunity, and it will be interesting to see how an organization like UNESCO or other organizations that are big enough to create that umbrella for convening these type of events can happen. But we desperately need it. I agree with the sentiment, I think, at the core of this.
One last question related to that. It's thinking about what you said about technology and it being a human experience and how people are interacting together, and that being so much a critical part of what you're trying to design for. How do you believe, or how might the use of avatars perpetuate existing stereotypes, or how do we ensure that we're creating an equitable experience for everyone in that space?
Yes, and this is on the mind of many teachers, and certainly on my mind as we bring students in these spaces. And it's challenging. It is, again, this is a new space, and it doesn't have very good frameworks. We're entering what are like really public spaces. Very few of them have actually embraced these design principles, like being universal design or human-centered. And I know even in the context of eco-peace, one of the challenges was that we had to create avatars that are reflective of the cultural norms. They're reflective of, just the setting and the student's background so that they feel comfortable. This is not readily addressed. Some platforms have begun to introduce more diversity, starting for skin color, hair, and identities are so important to us. But many other platforms do not have a good opportunity to address that. So I think it's important to think about it. I'm also asked by educators oftentimes, should they be a uniform? Should they be a universal avatar? Should they be something that actually schools themselves can provide as a policy? And I think in different settings, some of these may work to a degree, but identities are very important to us. And ultimately, any educational institutions, schools and universities, people come and they can test things and really find who they are. So my context usually is to say that we have to build for diversity. But if there is a lack of diversity, sometimes setting some parameters that the faculty or the school see as a cultural appropriate before they have a full the color palette of what might be a good identity is the way to go. And I also address this in a way that I have days when we go into the virtual world and it's our festival day and everybody can come any way they want to come in, and they can even wear wings if they want to. But the other days when we are focused and we are having very important discussions, maybe it's ethics or privacy. And at that point, it's a day when we want to just really be focused on that. And so I have really embraced a way that we have to communicate. We don't have all the things that we want, but it's important to communicate. And it's important that students or faculty feel comfortable, that there's some understanding of the limitations, whatever platform this may be. Ultimately, we need to design for diversity.
Thank you so much. That's about all the time that we have today. So again, Maya, thank you so much for your presentation. I want to thank you on behalf of our co-host, the UNESCO Institute of Information Technology and Education and Shanghai Open University, for your presentation. I want to thank the audience, those who were able to join us in person today, and those who are joining us from the future. Thank you for your participation. Maya, one last time, thanks for your presentation. Engaging, exciting, and I feel like I've got a glimpse of the future, and appreciate your time. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.